Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Let me tell you about the craziest thing that happened to me last week. It started with our annual Employee Appreciation Day. My wife and I have been running our small business for over a decade now, and we always make it a point to show our staff how much we value them. It's not just about the work they do, you know. These people are like family to us. So every year we organize this big shindig at a local park. We invite all our employees and their families. It's usually a pretty big deal. Around 50 people show up. In the past, we've always had it catered, but this year we decided to switch things up a bit. We spent more on renting a nicer pavilion and decided to order food from a popular chicken joint instead. Everyone seemed excited about the change, so I was feeling pretty good about it. I called up the chicken place and placed a massive order. Nearly $300 worth of food. It was a lot, but hey, these people deserve it. The day of the event, I drove across town to pick up the order. I was in a hurry trying to make sure everything was perfect for our employees. I got back to the park and started setting up when I realized something was missing. One of the bags of sauce. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's just sauce, right? But when you're feeding 50 people, every little thing matters. Plus, I had already paid for it. So I hopped back in my car and drove all the way back to the chicken place. When I got there, I explained the situation to the cashier. I told her about my large order and the missing bag of sauce. The cashier responded by offering to sell me more sauce at 25 cents per packet. I tried to explain that I had already paid for the sauce and just needed the forgotten bag. But the cashier looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. She called over the assistant manager, who wasn't any more helpful. The assistant manager insisted that if I wanted extra sauce, I'd have to pay for it at 25 cents each. I tried to explain again that it wasn't extra sauce, but the sauce I had already paid for, and that I was missing 16 packets. The assistant manager told me they couldn't see that in their system, and that if I wanted the sauce, I'd have to pay $4. I had just spent $300 with them, and they were nickel and diming me over $4 worth of sauce that I had already paid for. It was ridiculous. I pointed out how absurd this was, mentioning that I was a loyal customer who had just spent $300, and they were arguing with me over $4. The assistant manager apologized but insisted those were their rules. They said I could either pay for the sauce or leave without it. That's when something in me snapped. I'm usually a pretty easygoing guy, but this was too much. I remembered something about credit card transactions, how the companies charge merchants a minimum fee for each transaction. A plan started forming in my mind. I told them fine, I pay for the sauce. I pulled out my credit card and bought one sauce packet. Then I waited. 3 minutes later, I bought another, and another. One by one, I bought those 16 sauce packets, waiting 3 minutes between each transaction to make sure they couldn't be merged. The assistant manager's face went from smug to confused to downright angry as she realized what I was doing. But there was nothing she could do. I was paying for the sauce just like she wanted. The assistant manager tried to stop me, saying I couldn't do this and that I was holding up the line. I calmly replied that I was just following their rules, and they wanted me to pay for the sauce, so that's exactly what I was doing. It took me half an hour, but I got every single one of those sauce packets. And you know what? It felt good. I knew that those individual transactions would cost them way more in credit card fees than the $4 they were trying to squeeze out of me. Let me tell you, that chicken never tasted so sweet as it did at our Employee Appreciation Day. My wife got a good laugh out of it when I told her the story, and our employees enjoyed their meal, blissfully unaware of the sauce saga. Maybe next time they'll think twice before trying to charge a customer for something they've already paid for. I've been the sheriff of this small town for a couple of years now. It's usually a quiet place, not much excitement beyond the occasional speeding ticket or neighborly dispute. I'm a big guy, always have been. Played football in high school and kept up with weightlifting even after I joined the force. Most folks around here know me, and my size alone tends to keep troublemakers in check. Anyway, it was a Friday afternoon and I was off duty. I promised my wife I'd pick up some groceries on the way home. The local supermarket was busier than usual, probably because of the weekend rush. I grabbed what I needed and headed to the checkout. There were about 5 people ahead of me in line. I'm a patient man, so I didn't mind the wait. I was scrolling through my phone when I felt a tap on my shoulder. The woman behind me asked if she could go ahead of me, claiming she was in a hurry. I turned around to see a middle-aged woman with a cart full of items. Now I'm all for being courteous, but her cart had at least twice as much stuff as mine. I politely declined her request, explaining that I was also in a rush and there were other people waiting in line too. The woman became indignant, demanding to know if I knew who she was and insisting she didn't have time for this. I calmly reiterated that we were all waiting and it wouldn't be fair to let her cut in front of others. She huffed and puffed. A few minutes passed and I felt another tap on my shoulder. This time it was more of a shove. The woman angrily called me an overgrown oaf and repeated her demand to go first. I turned around trying to keep my cool. That's when I saw it. She had a pocket knife in her hand, blade out, pointed right at me. I told her to put the knife away immediately. She refused, insisting she wouldn't until I let her through, claiming she had important places to be. By this point, other people in line had noticed what was happening. Some backed away while others pulled out their phones, probably to record the incident. I gave her one last warning to put the knife away, or there would be consequences. She mockingly asked what I was going to do, suggesting I might call the cops. I told her that I was the sheriff of the town and she was currently threatening a law enforcement officer with a deadly weapon. For a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But then, something in her snapped. With a screech that could have shattered glass, she lunged at me, knife first. Now, I may be big, but years on the force have made me quick on my feet. I sidestepped her charge, grabbed her wrist, and in one smooth motion, had her face down on the ground, arm twisted behind her back. The knife clattered to the floor. I announced that she was under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and threatening a law enforcement officer. She yelled about police brutality and threatened to sue me. I calmly pointed out that she had just tried to stab me in front of dozens of witnesses, so her lawsuit wouldn't get very far. When I held her down, I asked one of the cashiers to call the station. Within minutes, my deputy arrived with a patrol car. We cuffed her and read her rights. All the while, she was screaming about her rights and how we'd regret this. The whole incident was over in less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. As we led her out to the patrol car, one older gentleman even came up to shake my hand. The older man praised my quick thinking and expressed relief that I was there. I humbly responded that I was just doing my job even when off duty. In the end, the woman was booked and charged. Turns out she had a history of similar incidents in neighboring towns. I guess she picked the wrong day and the wrong line to try her luck. As for me, well, I eventually got my groceries. My wife wasn't too happy about me being late, but she understood once I explained what happened. We had a good laugh about it over dinner. You know, being a sheriff in a small town might seem boring to some, but days like this remind me why I took this job. To protect and serve, even if it means taking down a knife-wielding woman in the checkout line of a supermarket. Just another day in the life, I suppose. A few years ago, my dad passed away. He was the rock of our family, always taking care of everything, especially for my mom. When he died, it felt like our world turned upside down. My mom was devastated, and I knew I had to step up. I took over managing her finances, paying bills, and handling all the household stuff my dad used to do. It wasn't easy, but it was the least I could do for her. Fast forward to a few months ago, when Mom decided it was time to downsize. The big house held too many memories, and she wanted a fresh start. We sold the place, and she moved into a cozy apartment. One day, I got this letter from a debt collection agency saying I owed them £134 and some change. I was confused because I'm usually on top of my bills, so I called them up to figure out what was going on. I explained to the agent that I had received a letter about owing money but wasn't sure what it was for. The agent checked and told me it was for the broadband service at my mom's old address. I told them that didn't make sense because I had canceled that service when my mom moved out, and the phone line and broadband were part of the same package. The agent said they'd look into it further and get back to me. A few days later, I got another call. The agent explained that they couldn't cancel the broadband because the cancellation request didn't come from the account holder. I told them I was the account holder and had been managing the account for years. The agent insisted their records showed the account holder was my father. I explained there must be a mistake because my father had passed away a few years ago and I had taken over the account after that. The agent apologized but said they could only discuss the matter with the account holder and couldn't speak with me about it anymore. I protested, saying it was impossible since he was deceased, but the agent just repeated their policy of needing to speak with the account holder before hanging up. I was fuming. How could they be so stubborn? The letters kept coming, threatening legal action against me, not my dad. It was ridiculous. After weeks of back and forth, getting nowhere, I decided to do something drastic. I drove to the cemetery where my dad was buried. It was a beautiful, peaceful place, with well-kept grounds and old trees. I found his grave and took out my phone. I called the company again and told them I was calling about my father's broadband account. When the agent asked how they could help, I told them the account holder was there and they could go ahead and speak with him since they had insisted on it. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the gravestone. Then I walked away, leaving them to talk to my dad. Strolled around the churchyard, enjoying the quiet and trying not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. After a few minutes, I heard some angry voices coming from my phone. I picked it up and asked if they'd had any luck speaking with the account holder. The agent, sounding angry, demanded to know what was going on and if this was some kind of joke. I calmly explained that it wasn't a joke at all. I had brought them to the account holder as they had insisted, and I'd love to know if my dad had said anything to them. I added that it had been hard to reach him under 6 feet of dirt since we buried him a couple of years ago. There was complete silence on the other end of the line. I almost felt bad for the agent. The flustered agent said they'd transfer me to their manager. The manager came on the line and said they understood there had been some confusion about the account. I dryly remarked that was putting it mildly. The manager then apologized sincerely for the inconvenience and insensitivity they'd shown. They promised to sort it out immediately, assuring me there would be no balance owing and they'd update their records. I thanked them, expressing my appreciation for their understanding. A month later, I got a letter from the debt collection agency saying the matter was resolved, and I didn't owe anything. It was a relief, but I couldn't help feeling frustrated about all the unnecessary stress. I often think about that day in the cemetery. In a strange way, it felt like my dad was there with me, probably shaking his head and chuckling at the absurdity of it all. I like to think he would have been proud of how I handled it. And who knows, maybe he did have a word with them from the great beyond. All I know is I'm glad it's over, and I hope I never have to go to such extremes again to prove a point. I've always been the type of person who tries to stay fit and help out where I can. I grew up in a small town, always lending a hand to those in need. So when I moved to the city for work, I made sure to keep up those values. My job as a software developer can be pretty demanding, often leaving me glued to a chair for hours. To counteract that, I make it a point to hit the gym regularly. It's not just about staying in shape, it's my way of clearing my head and staying sane in this fast-paced world. This one day started like any other. I woke up early, knocked out an intense workout at the gym, and then decided to run some errands. One of those errands included a trip to the local recycling center. I didn't bother changing out of my gym clothes, just threw on a ratty old t-shirt over my sweats. Who was I trying to impress at a recycling center, right? When I arrived, the place was pretty quiet. I started unloading my car, tossing bottles and cans into their designated bins. As I was finishing up, I noticed 2 other cars pull in behind me. The first was driven by an elderly lady, and right behind her was an older gentleman. I had just closed my trunk when I looked over at the elderly lady's car. Her trunk was packed full of neatly tied stacks of newspapers. She was standing there looking a bit overwhelmed by the task ahead of her. I walked over to her and politely asked if she needed help with her newspapers. The elderly lady looked at me with relief in her eyes and gratefully accepted my offer, thanking me for my kindness. I smiled and got to work, carefully lifting the stacks and tossing them into the paper recycling container. When I was doing this, I noticed the elderly man behind us was struggling with some heavy bags in his trunk. After finishing with the lady's newspapers, I approached the gentleman. I asked if he needed assistance with the heavy bags. The man wiped his brow and nodded gratefully, mentioning that his old bones weren't what they used to be. I started hauling the bags over to the plastic recycling bin. They were filled with various plastic containers, so I emptied them out, making sure everything went where it was supposed to. While I've been helping these folks, I hadn't noticed another car pull up, a minivan. As I finished helping the elderly man, I heard a sharp voice behind me. I turned around to see a woman, probably in her 40s, standing by her minivan with the back door open. Her tone and demeanor immediately rubbed me the wrong way. She was demanding that I come and empty her car. I politely explained that I didn't work there and was just helping out some nice people. The woman insisted that since I had helped the others, I should help her too, assuming it was my job. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. I repeated that I didn't work there, explaining that this section was self-serve. I pointed out where she could find actual employees if she needed assistance. The woman accused me of lying, insisting that she had seen me helping others and demanding that I do my job. I explained that I was simply being kind, but since she wasn't being polite, I wouldn't be helping her. The woman threatened to report me for not doing my job. I calmly replied that she was welcome to do so, suggesting they'd be interested to hear about her harassing a volunteer. With that, I turned and started walking back to my car. I could hear her sputtering with rage behind me, but I ignored it. I just wanted to get out of there and go home. As I got into my driver's seat and started the engine, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. To my disbelief, the woman had run in front of my car and was now standing there, arms spread wide, blocking my exit. She was yelling that I wasn't going anywhere until I emptied her car. I looked around, but the elderly man was still unloading his car and there wasn't enough room to back up. I was effectively trapped. That's when I remembered something I'd learned in a legal seminar at work. I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could see it. I warned her that what she was doing could be considered a form of kidnapping in our state, intentionally preventing someone from leaving an area. I told her that I had no problem calling 911 and reporting this, mentioning that they do prosecute for this kind of thing. The woman's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she stood there frozen, processing what I'd said. Then, with a string of profanities that would make a sailor blush, she scurried out of my way. I didn't waste any time. I drove out of there as quickly as I safely could, watching in my rearview mirror as the woman's figure grew smaller, her arms waving wildly as she continued to shout. What was supposed to be a simple trip to the recycling center had turned into a bizarre confrontation with an entitled stranger. But in the end, what matters is not the actions of one angry person, but the small acts of kindness we can do for others every day. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.